Welcome to this evening's meeting of the Westerville City Schools Board of Education. We are delighted to have all of you this evening. The agenda will be displayed on the screen in the front of the room. There will be 3 opportunities this evening to address the board. The first being Agenda Item 7.1. The first set of public comments is relative to Agenda Items 9.1 to 13 through 13.1. Please state the agenda items you are referencing at the beginning of your comments. The second opportunity is Agenda Item 8.1 related to public hearing. Members of the public are invited to provide input to the board of an issue of reemploying Elaine Kolna, cafeteria recess aide during her SIRS service retirement. And the final opportunity is Agenda Item 14.1. There's a sign-up sheet located on the table in the back of the room, and each speaker will have 5 minutes to address the board, and a timer will be shown on the screen. And with that, Ms. Marshall, will you please call the roll?
Mr. Bell?
Here.
Mrs. Meyer?
Here.
Dr. Nestor Baker?
Here.
Mrs. Altman?
Here.
Mrs. Davidson?
Here. Will you please join us in the Pledge of Allegiance? I pledge
Allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
.1 is executive session negotiations. May I please have a motion?
So moved.
Second.
Dr. Nestor Baker?
Yes.
Mrs. Meyer?
Yes.
Mr. Bell?
Yes.
Mrs. Altman?
Yes.
Mrs. Davidson?
Yes. We're going to step out for a couple of minutes, and we'll come back when we're done.
And members of the board. Want to spend a little bit of time tonight talking through the recent guidelines we sent out as a district to our staff and families regarding working with our LGBTQ plus community members. So I know that the written document that went out has generated discussion amongst some folks. I've had some conversations as we try and decipher the written word and clarify what those written words mean in terms of practice. So I thought I'd take a few minutes tonight to talk about that with the board as we go through. And I just want to begin with the assurance that the underlying premise of everything we're trying to do in conjunction with the board has always been about supporting our students and protecting our students. And that's really the underlying piece of what we're trying to put together here. So, and we know that that's important right now. There are lots of other places where policymakers seem to be going in directions that don't seem consistent, wholly consistent with that. So with that, I want to start with why we put anything at all on paper. And really, what we put on paper is clarification about policies and practices that have been in place for really 2 decades as we talk to our staff. But given the current environment, increasingly, beginning last year, we saw, particularly from staff members, requests for some clarification on what those practices are. Could we be clear so we understand as staff members what the expectations are? So really, putting it on paper was an effort to clarify with everybody and provide better consistency around what we're doing. And again, overarching goal here is to provide protection and support for all students, and in this case, this particular group of students. So I want to start with process. How did we get to the document that we put out? So we really began, actually last spring and through the summer, kind of going through current policies that are in place and how we act on those policies in the past with our students. So there hasn't been any change in any of our policies. We didn't make any policy changes. The board hasn't voted any. There isn't any in front of them to vote on. We really just looked at those as a grounding place for what does our policy say and how do we interpret that policy relative to this particular population of students and staff. We reviewed that with legal counsel and collectively with our leadership team from all that. That's where that set of guidelines came from. So again, no policies or intended changes in past practice, more clarification so we can have some consistency and some awareness. So I want to look at some of that a little bit deeper. So really, we started work in equity several years ago, actually with the hiring of Cynthia DeVise and the creation of that position 8 years ago, and have been building upon that equity education work in our district for a while. A lot of that has been focused more on race and ethnicity, and increasingly we're seeing within our equity work the need to open the aperture more to more groups, including LGBTQ+. So that really began looking at that last spring as we transitioned leadership in that equity department. We engage with an external entity who works in this space and contract with them to provide some professional development. And so that professional development was provided to all of our administrators, our administrative retreat, as a means of building knowledge and understanding and their confidence. The board itself conducted in a work session with that same group along the same lines for the same purposes. And then we've provided that training as an opportunity for our staff as we open up the school year, and we continue to offer those opportunities through both our district equity efforts and at our building equity team as we build our capacity to understand and have knowledge that we need. So we've put that place in as part of our equity work. Within our policy, the board may recall that several years ago, we made an adjustment to our non-discrimination policy. And under our non-discrimination policy, we explicitly included gender identity and sexual orientation as protected classes under Title IX. That's baked into our policy, but the fact that it's baked into our policy obligates us as a staff to provide those protections to those students as a protected class. So that's built in. And I say that because right now, as you look around other policymakers, that little nugget seems to be a point of contention amongst policymakers about whether or not that's acceptable. We have opted and did several years ago to put that in and are acting in accordance with that. So that provides a protection for those individuals. One of the other areas that people talk about that we are keenly aware of and sensitive to is the mental health of our students and protections, not just here at school, but elsewhere. And I'm reminded, I remind ourselves that we have a mandatory reporting law and policy that provides protection under those cases where we're working with any students who we have concerns about abuse or neglect. And there's a mandatory reporting process that would be inclusive within this space. So we have that piece as well, if we see that concern, as well as our bullying and intimidation policies, which are in place as well. The last piece I'd say is we have, as I talk to folks in our district who have been working with families and students within this population for several years now, and talking about that, where we've had strength in our efforts has been around our support and partnering with families and students in terms of working with them within the school environment to provide them the safety and the comfort and the sense of belonging in our school district that they deserve. And so we've always done that. And I would say the other thing I would do is continue to encourage families to have these conversations at home. This is a hot button topic. It's a lot of conversation, a lot of spheres. Our students are hearing it. They're motivated and active around that. And I would encourage our families to have those conversations at home, as I'm sure they are, so that they and their children can understand each other as well, which helps us in our partnership with them. And that's an important piece of this. So all those pieces are in place and more. There's a history. The board took action last spring in opposition to some of the legislative efforts that were going on around what I'd say stymieing the way we present history and talk about race in this country, and that's been part of it as well. We have been very active in the curriculum instruction space to continue to broaden the materials that we bring into our classrooms so that there's representation for our students, and that includes within this context as well. So that's kind of a setting. So I'm going to touch on the specific components and the guidelines that went out. And I would say this, the ones that were presented in that document were ones as we talked to our building administrators who are out on the front lines and having conversations with folks and with our families. We asked, what are the areas where you think we need the greatest clarification? And that's where these came from. Obvious one is pronouns. That's a big one. It's a big topic. So I reference our non-discrimination policy. There's a second policy that's applicable to this particular question of whether or not teachers, staff, not just teachers, staff, adults in our building who represent authority figures, can or cannot ask students for their pronouns, preferred pronouns. And there's, as we talked to legal, and this makes sense to us, as we looked at two policies, our non-discrimination policy, these are protected class, therefore that information is protected information, as well as 2416, which is a long-standing policy and law around student privacy and parental access, which requires us to proactively get parent permission, student permission if they're 18, to ask them specific questions about specific topics, including anything that has to do with sex or sexual orientation. It's baked in there. That's a long-standing piece. So those two pieces provide a policy framework around this question of whether or not staff should ask those questions. And as we talk to our attorneys, talk to legal, the answer would be no. It's not appropriate for us to ask that because we're asking a young person to reveal protected information. Staff represent people of authority within a building, and as we always work with our students, and our families tell our students, when you go to school, do what you're asked to do. So we're asking protected information from a protected class. Take that same scenario and put it in any kind of other question around protected information, and you have the same problem. So it's not that we don't want an inviting environment. It's not that we don't want a welcoming environment. It's not that we don't want our teachers receptive to talking to kids about who they are and what they want to be. It's not that we're not receptive to buildings or relationships and trust. It's not that we're not even receptive to students saying to us, this is what I'd prefer. We'll respond to that and act accordingly to what the child has asked us to do. We're just not going to be the ones initiating the request. The other piece of this, and I'll go back to the family piece, is we will honor a family's request if one is made to us regarding how they would like us to address their child as it relates to pronouns. I'm not asking staff to pick up the phone and ask parent permission. We will honor that if we're asked. That's baked into the communication went out to families. We've had a handful reach out to us and already tell us what their preference is, which is helpful to us and to them and to the families if we're all on the same page. So that's the pronoun piece. Names are a little bit different. We've been asking students their preferred names for years and years and years. You know, as I said in the letter, my name's William, call me Bill. So we've been doing that for years. And talking to legal, it doesn't get into that same area around disclosing privileged information. And I understand for some people there's some gray area in there. Always a good idea to lean on your legal counsel. Again, student gives us a name that prefers to use. That's okay to ask that on paper, whatever it is. Teachers have been doing that for hundreds of years. It's fine. But again, if a parent makes a particular request, we'll honor that as well. And again, we're not going to obligate our staff to start picking up the phone and letting parents know. Restroom access, I think, in the handful of people I've talked to, has been the one that seems, the language we wrote seems to have been interpreted in a way that people feel would be becoming more restrictive to what we've been doing. Again, the intent was to communicate this is the same practice we've been doing for years. For years, we've had students and families come to us on this question, and we've worked with them to find a satisfying solution. And we'll continue to do that. There's no change in any arrangements anybody has already in the system. Going to the restroom in an elementary school is a very different experience than going to the restroom in a secondary school. In elementary school, it's typically a very organized activity where everybody kind of knows what's going on. In secondary, every time the bell rings, there's people going to the restroom with a lot less supervision. So we put the phrase in there about working with staff as an intent to remind students and families that if this question is something that is sensitive to you and needs protections around it, because in doing so, a student may be saying, I would prefer not to use this particular restroom, but I still would prefer not to be in a public restroom because I still prefer to keep my status to myself. Again, it's privileged information. So we want to be available to people in that space as any other. So we're not denying access. We're not changing practice. We'll continue working with people. Frankly, if someone goes in the bathroom, we'd be fools not to think that there aren't bad things that happen in our bathrooms outside of this all the time. If you want my experience on it right now, vaping in our bathrooms is the big problem. So bathroom supervision and what goes on in bathrooms is a long-standing history and pattern of problems that we have to deal with. This has traditionally not been a problem for us, and so we're not going to make it seemingly become one. So really no change in status there, no change in practice. We'll work with families and students to make sure they have appropriate access, and we want our staff to know that that's the case. So it doesn't become an issue between a staff member and a student. I think this was a case where we talked about, and you mentioned being curious rather than for a staff member to be curious about what a student is, why they might be accessing a particular bathroom rather than being in that disciplinary mode. So really no change. Teaching and learning, we have board adopted curriculum materials. Those are all vetted. They all have opportunity for public scrutiny. They're going to go through the process. All of our curriculum and materials stuff is online. Anybody can see it, and you can see what we're using. Teachers do have professional judgment. We have policy that allows for that, for them to take opportunity to talk about other pieces that may not be directly related to their specific curriculum. We have a policy on controversial issues in the classroom that provide teachers guidance on how to do that appropriately. I've seen some of our teachers do some really outstanding proactive work with informing their parents about something they're going to do or discuss in the classroom, which may fall into that zone of being something a parent would be concerned about. that proactive stance allows for communication and confidence building and trust building right off the bat, rather than when the child comes home and explains what's already happened. And so I would encourage our teachers to use that good professional judgment along the way when they're doing something in the classroom to say, I need some help in this, and then along the way. And then want to be sure, part of what we're trying to do through the communication and ongoing professional development in our district is to build the confidence and knowledge for our staff across the board to be able to make these decisions and work with families and students without having to look over their shoulder and worry and have to ask us all the time what's acceptable and what's not. We want them to have that professional integrity and professional judgment. There are logical places for family members, students, and then our staff to go with questions. Of course, your classroom teacher is always a good starting place, as is the school counselor, as is the building principal. For our school staff, we have all kinds of support, really 3 big buckets. We have our equity education department. It has got a coordinator, it's got a teacher on special assignment, and we have all of our equity facilitators in our buildings, who all have been part of our knowledge building and understanding around this. Those are great go-to people for our staff for support. For our student wellness office, with Tammy Santa and that team of mental health, she also works with the school counselors. They are a great resource for specific kinds of questions as well. And then for our particular administrators, when you get into policy questions, I'm not sure what this one means. I have a tough one on my hands. We have our executive directors of elementary, Cheryl Relford, and our executive director of secondary, Ann Baldwin. They have a direct link into our executive team. We have legal counsel we can always talk to. So there are places for people to go, get help, get support. There's policies in place to protect our students. There's practices in place that we think make sense. There's opportunity for our parents to communicate and work with us. And we just want to continue encouraging the conversation moving forward so that we can ensure that all of our students have equal access to our school, feel welcome, feel supported, and feel protected like they should be at school. Last thing I'd tell you, so everybody knows, those guidelines that we put out are also on our district intranet, which is accessible only to our internal staff, so they have direct access to that document at any point. We've done talking, listening sessions with elementary counselors. We have secondary counselors this week. We've done equity facilitators, social workers, and we've met with all of our administrators. So we continue having the conversations and making sure everybody understands what is it we're trying to do in this space. So I appreciate all the support the board's had, the questions you've had, the thinking you've added to where we're at. To all of our staff who's contributed this, and there's been many people. This wasn't a John Kellogg authored this by himself. This was a lot of different people had opportunity. For those who read it and felt that the wording isn't reflective of what I'm saying now, I apologize. I hope that this clarifies for some folks, and we'll continue having the conversations and understanding as this evolves. So happy to take any questions from the board at this time.
So I got a question over the weekend about whether or not students are able to still go talk to the counselors about how they feel about their sexual identity or gender identity and get support in that circumstance.
Absolutely. That's what our school counselors, it's part of what their background experience is. We also that would be a great starting point, and from the school counselors, depending on the child and what they're presenting to them, like anything, if it's out of their skill set domain, we have places to elevate it to make sure we can support that child best we can. But yes, we would encourage those conversations all the time. We want to build those relationships.
Thanks for doing that, for summarizing that again. So I have a couple of questions. One is regarding, so giving guidance to staff in terms of their ability to share their own pronouns, right?
No restrictions. It's their own personal privileged information. If that's something they want to share, I think that's appropriate. I would always advise our staff presenting yourself and building a relationship with their students is important. But as we all know, there are spaces in there that you just have to be thoughtful to as well, right? So as a professional, I think if you view that as a way of building relationship with those students, I think that makes sense. But there's lots of information about ourselves that we hold professionally as well. And a reminder that you're presenting information to a group of people. You've just presented privileged information to a group of people who now have that at their hands, and that you should think that through. I'm not discouraging anybody. I would just, my own self would be thoughtful about where I'm sharing that and making sure I'm comfortable and feel safe in doing so.
There's nothing that stops staff from sharing that information if they want to.
There's nothing in our policies at this point that would require us to say to staff they can't do those things. There are places that have done that. I know of private organizations, businesses that have restricted what people can put on their sign-off, et cetera. We have not gone down that path.
Thank you. And then in terms of protected information, you alluded to that there's all kinds of protected information that we don't ask students for, and that the legal advice, that we've been given and what's arisen through these conversations is that proactively asking students for pronouns is delving into that protected information area. So can you just, I'm sure we can all think of something, but give us an example of something that isn't related to gender, that's protected information that we would not proactively ask for?
First one comes to mind is health status. Asking a particular student if they have a particular health issue in front of all their other students would be in that place. Asking about their family status, parental status. There's information in there. Asking them their financial circumstances in their family. Are you free and reduced lunch? And these are examples of things that are restricted to people who need to know for whatever reason. And so those are spaces, and our teachers do a good job of that. They understand that. And this would fall under that umbrella, at least as it looks at this time. And so part of that is, yes, I'm speaking to about the protection of the student and their privileged information. You're asking a young person in front of classmates who may or may not receive that information the right way to reveal that. The second side of that is, as a person in a position of authority asking that question, you now might be construed as being in violation of our policy in Title IX. And so this is about our staff being in the right place too, so that if there's an issue presented about them, we've positioned them to be defended the way we want to defend them around policy and our legal guidance. So that's part of it as well.
Thank you.
So I just have one question. I think we've given teachers and staff the opportunity to create safe spaces that let our students know that they're welcome to talk about what they need to talk about. Can you give us some examples of those?
There's all kinds of things students will come to us. They may come to us talking to us about self-harm, which has been increasingly an alarming part of what we have to do, right? Their own mental health status. They may come to us with disclosing issues they're having in relationships, teenage relationships, right? So boyfriend-girlfriend relationships. They may come to us with concerns or revealing to us issues they're having with drugs and alcohol. So there's all kinds of things that our students come to us for years and years and years. And this is one of them that have, and I think what we're seeing is in this environment, we're increasingly, there's a call for greater protections. We're seeing more and more students present to us that they identify with this community and are looking for those same opportunities for protection. So yeah, there are all kinds of things our kids will come talk to us about that are sensitive pieces that, our adults are work with and are trained with to deal with. And I think when you alter the context of what we're talking about and you put in these other places, it starts to line up more about, okay, that's how schools should look and should feel.
When I went to conferences, there was one thing I noticed overwhelmingly that I hadn't noticed before, but there were lots of signs and stickers and, just different forms of communication to let kids know they were loved and welcomed, and I really appreciated that. I looked at some of Eli's paperwork that he didn't fill out and turn in, but on there it was like, is there anything else you would like to share? So I think there are lots of opportunities that our staff is trying to give to students to talk and feel safe. So I really appreciated those things.
I notice that too. When you walk our hallways, you go in our schools, you go by classrooms, there's lots of messages about support. Our staff is just, particularly post-COVID, has really taken this part to heart. We know that we're not getting their minds if we don't have the heart and souls. And so our kids come to us with things that are on their mind, and it's hard to start talking about Pythagorean theorem when what's on your mind is something much more impactful, right? This is the old taxonomy of how we work with them. So I'm always proud of the way our staff do that. And again, like you, Ms. Davidson, as I walk the buildings, I see lots of those messages across the system. We're not going to shut that down. That's a part of the belonging part of what we're trying to do. So, and we will continue to monitor what's going on with policymakers and make our voices heard, as the board has done in the past, and we'll continue to do.
I just want to thank you, John, for the in-depth discussion of this and for the context placement as well. The district has been involved for many years, and you mentioned 20 years on some of the pieces that we've worked on, has been involved for 20 years in putting these structural pieces in place to help protect our children and to partner with families and to provide the kind of guidance that the adults need in working with the families. This is, as you said, a very important hot-button topic at this point in time, as it should be. But there are always issues of great concern to students, issues that, when you are young, feel like it is your entire life. And you, as you said, you can't deal with Pythagorean theorem if you are looking at your whole life as creating a situation that you don't feel you're supported in, whatever the reason may be. So what we try to do, at this particular table, is to create that kind of framework that allows our students to grow and to thrive, and that lets us put forward the type of resources, the type of guidance that our staff, our children and young people, and our families need. And it is always a function of looking at the whole. And that is where we're most likely to achieve success, is if we look at the whole, as we look at children and their development, as we look at families and their role in that development, as we look at staff and their important role in that development as well. So thank you for bringing that clarification. It's one of those pieces that, even though I certainly agree that it was necessary to send the piece out because there were questions and people wanted guidance, and it doesn't help to say, well, read your policy manual. So I appreciate that, but I also know that immediately there were questions and concerns and rumors. And I appreciate the information that hopefully will help put some of those rumors to rest and answer some of those questions.
Thank you, Dr. Nestor Baker, on that one. I should mention that on Friday, after several questions about the restroom piece, we sent out a clarification again. I sent out a specific email to our principals, our school counselors, and our equity facilitators. Ran it by a couple people that I really trust, and I said, yep, that's clear. And that email to those groups is consistent with what I said this evening. So hopefully, whatever dust up, we're starting to work through that. And I would encourage people to have those conversations directly with our folks. That's the best source of information in terms of what we're trying to do and trying to accomplish. I think if you have those conversations, you'll see that the hearts are in the right place of what we're trying to do.
Just to follow up on that, this is really just a comment, and I never speak for the board. I just say this for myself, but I think for any families or any students who have questions, please go and talk to your building administrators, your counselors. You know, I have only seen people wanting to make these schools welcoming for all students. And it's not always done, you know, we do things, we write things up, we send out emails, sometimes they're not clear, sometimes they have to be clarified through comments like this or a follow-up email. But truly, truly, every student, whether they're a member of LGBTQ plus population, especially in the context of this conversation, or another population of students that understands themselves to maybe be, I don't know what the word is, but wanting or needing some special attention or special consideration. I think I've only seen people want all of our students to succeed and be welcomed and loved. And so as a board member, if I can be helpful in that, please reach out to me. Happy to have a conversation. Thanks.
Okay, thank you so much, John. We appreciate it. Moving on, 6.1, approve the minutes of the Board of Education meeting held September 12th, 2022 as presented. May I have a motion, please?
So moved.
Second?
Any questions or comments here? Hearing none?
Mr. Bell?
Yes.
Mrs. Altman?
Yes.
Mrs. Meyer?
Yes.
Dr. Nesterbaker?
Yes.
Mrs. Davidson?
Yes. 7.1, public comments. We do not have any. 8.1, public hearing. Elaine Coina. We do not have any public comments. Nicole, do you want to talk to us a little bit about this?
Yes, so this is a employee who retired through the school employees retirement system, and Ohio law requires that we hold a public hearing prior to reemploying anyone that's retired under an Ohio public retirement system. So she's looking at returning back to the CRA position, cafeteria recess aide position. So the mic is open if anyone wants to make comments.
Okay, hearing none, moving on. 9.1, a resolution to approve the purchases in accordance with ORC 5705.41 and Board Policy 6320. May I have a motion?
So moved.
Second.
Do you want to talk to us a little bit about that? Okay.
Yes, thank you, President Davidson. Members of the board, so this is what we affectionately call our then and now purchase orders. So this is where we have a purchase order that was dated after the invoice date for a purchase. So this is for a summer cheer camp with the Cheer Incorporated. And this was just a case of where the parents were meant to pay a Cheer, but they paid us instead. So we're in turn writing a check to them. So we do have the money that was budgeted, and we will pay this with your approval. Good. Mr. Bell?
Yes.
Mrs. Meyer?
Yes.
Dr. Nesterbaker?
Yes.
Mrs. Altman?
Yes.
Mrs. Davidson?
Yes. 9.2, approve the financial report and investments for August 2022. May I have a motion, please?
So moved.
Second?
And whenever you're ready, Ms. Marshall.
Thank you. So yes, we are going over August 31st month-end financial reports. So August would be the second month of the fiscal year. Just keep in mind, our fiscal year begins July 1st. So for the general fund, we had year-to-date receipts of $79.7 million, year-to-date expenditures of $34.7 million. And just a reminder, we do receive our August property tax settlement in August, so, which is why revenues are so high. We ended with a general fund unencumbered fund balance of $190.3 million. And for all funds, we had year-to-date receipts of $97.1 million, year-to-date expenditures of $58.8 million, and we ended with unencumbered funds for all funds at $256.7 million. That's all I have.
Any questions here? Hearing none?
Dr. Nesterbaker?
Yes.
Mrs. Altman?
Yes.
Mr. Bell?
Yes.
Mrs. Meyer?
Yes.
Mrs. Davidson?
Yes. Would it be okay with everyone if we took the personnel consent agenda as one?
Yes. Has it been-
Okay, personnel consent agenda, 10.1 through 10.
I think it goes down to 10.1,
It's supposed to be 10.15, right?
10.16.
There we go.
10.16.
Oh, there, it's not up
It
here.
was updated.
All right, yay, 10.16. May I have a motion?
So moved.
Second.
And Carrie Dennis is with us. Welcome this evening.
Thank you, and good evening, President Davidson, members of the board, Dr. Kellogg, and Ms. Marshall. I would like to present for you, for your consideration tonight's personnel consent agenda. This evening, we are asking the board to consider and approve the following. We have our usual array of resignations and change of assignments. There are fall and year-long supplementals on the consent agenda, along with welcoming 9 classified employees to our district. The board will also see an MOA with WEA for the Raptor application within the Safety and Security Department, and an MOU with WEA related to the phase-out of professional development increments per the current bargain agreement. We have 3 retirements to recognize this evening. Willie Smith will retire from his current role as a custodian at Hanby Elementary School with 10 years of service. Victoria Weisenberger will retire from her current role as a secretary in our transportation department after a total of 30 years of service for our students. Lucy Rader Brown will be retiring as the district's EL coordinator with 22 years of dedicated service to Westerville City Schools. A lot to be thankful and grateful for, and wishing them well. Of special interest, the board will have for its consideration the collective bargaining agreement for the OPSI Local 138. Along with that are the guidelines for the administrative approved staff. I'd be happy to answer any questions you might have.
Questions here?
No questions, but I just want to say thank you to the teams who worked so hard on the contract that is up for approval now. Thanks to you, thanks to the employee side as well. Really appreciate that work.
Thank you.
I agree. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Anything else? Hearing none? Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Mrs. Meyer?
Yes.
Dr. Nesterbaker?
Yes.
Mr. Bell?
Yes.
Mrs. Altman?
Yes.
Mrs. Davidson?
Yes. We do not have any old business this evening. We do not have any new business this evening, but we do have recommended action. 13.1, donations. May I have a motion here?
So moved.
Second?
And would anyone like to speak about this, or a question or comment? Thank you.
It's pretty remarkable.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It's amazing. I know.
It
I look
really
at
is.
this, I'm in awe.
Yeah,
so.
just, we always say it, but always mean it. Thank you to everybody who has participated in making these donations. I'm just going to read off a couple since maybe not everybody can see these right at this moment. We have donations from the Westerville Rotary, Ohio District of Kiwanis International, Music Boosters, Theater Boosters, Church of the Messiah Methodist, individuals, various PTAs, just on and on and on. So businesses and individuals in the community too. So totaling, I have to get back down there, $72,648.27. So thank you all.
Mr. Bell?
Yes.
Mrs. Altman?
Yes.
Mrs. Meyer?
Yes.
Dr. Nesterbaker?
Yes.
Mrs. Davidson?
Yes. Moving on to our agenda, we have some public comments this evening. Just a friendly reminder that you will have 5 minutes. Sorry. There will be a timer shown on the screen, and Mr. Hershiser will call time when 5 minutes has elapsed. And our first speaker this evening is Lori Jones.
So before you start that timer, I got to educate you guys on something. Gender identity is not sexual orientation. It is who they are as people. It's not protected. It's not secret. It's at our core. That's my comment to start. Now I will read. Now start that timer. My name is Lori Jones. My pronouns are they, them. Let me introduce myself. I am an out and proud member of Westerville's queer community. I, like all of you, work for the Westerville City Schools. I'm a lunch lady at Heritage Middle School, the best middle school in the district. I invite you all to come down, spend a day with me in the cafeteria. We have the best, most amazing kids. They are smart and worldly. We have students from 20-plus nations speaking over 20 languages. We have queer kids and their straight friends who walk our hallways. We have kids who understand better than you or I how hard it is growing up in a world where adults are using their skin color and sexual orientation and gender as ammunition to attack the fabric of public education. Children are being used as pawns in a very dangerous game. I cannot decide if you sending out this letter is willful ignorance to that fact, or if it comes from transphobia. I guess your future actions will answer that question. We can discuss politics all you want. Hell, I will even take you guys for coffee and a cocktail to do so. But here in front of this body, I want to say to you, nope, I'm sorry. I'm going to ask you all to seek courage. Stop this ridiculous pacifying of the far right and their war on queers. If you do not reevaluate how you are handling this, several things are going to happen. The first, vulnerable young people who don't have families to talk to, who are in your charge, in your schools, are going to take matters into their own hands, and they will think that the only way they can make it through this is to end their life. I would hope in the position you all are in that that is the very last thing you want to have happen. But by the directives of this letter you wrote, I can only imagine that you have weighed this possibility and you are okay with upping the ante on queer kids' lives. You will have the blood of dead children on your hands. Are you all ready for that? Queer kids who are supported, seen, and heard are 40% less likely to harm themselves. Why do you all choose to be anything but a positive light in a queer child's life? Secondly, every one of you sitting up there knows this is not going to stop with the Tennessee decision. You know they will come for queer teachers and queer lunch ladies next. They already are in other parts of the country. We have already had candidates and sitting politicians here in Ohio call for not only our jobs, but our deaths. Wrap your head around that for a second. They want me dead. It's amazing to me. Amazing. I will then ask, if you don't take a stand now, when will you? Please stop writing letters to pacify people who thus far don't outwardly exist in this district. And if they do, are you really telling me you would rather stand with them versus standing with your queer students and staff? Will you continue to cave to lawyers and ignorance while helping those that wish us harm? The Tennessee case is harmful. It was designed to be harmful, and you trying to wiggle into rocking the boat to not rocking the boat with all of this policy stuff is harmful. I want you to please take a long, hard look at me. Understand when I say there is no way on God's green earth this queer is getting put back in a closet. I am 54 years old. I have zero cares left to give about myself. I have been fighting since the day of AIDS. The ignorance that comes with what is happening now in many ways is worse than anything we faced in the early 90s. My God, we know better now. Start acting like it. Do not think for a second we will stop fighting. Now, what you should also know is that queer kids today are not my generation. They do not hide. They do not believe in closets. If you have been paying attention, they kick the hinges off those doors and have not been living in the dark. Why would you expect them to shrink and shrivel at these 4 preposterous items that you have set forth in your addressing of the Tennessee lawsuit? And I understand their policy. I get it. Maybe it's time we change policy. You are going to see the young people of this city and state rise up. You may think you are dealing with me, but I can assure you, you are dealing with a bunch of kids who know exactly who they are, and they are queer and queer allies who are sick and tired of adults like you and I and the board playing games with their identities. I heard when I started working for the school how progressive we are as a district. 2 of you who ran this last time, who are now sitting in front of me, said they would fight for queer kids. This letter was not fighting. This letter was a start to aligning with the right's insistence that queer people are less than. We are seeing it over and over again. You even said so. There are times in all our histories that we have to plant a flag and rally around it and fight. I've been fighting for years. Now it is your time. Because if you don't fight for queer kids, then what in the hell are you doing in the education system as leaders? Thank you.
Thank you, Lori. Up next, Valerie Cummings. Welcome.
Hi, thank you. My name is Valerie Cummings, and my pronouns are she, her. And tonight I'm sharing a letter that was written from a concerned mother who couldn't be here tonight and wishes to keep her child's identity anonymous. So I'll be reading her letter on her behalf. Dear Dr. Kellogg and board members, I am the parent of a young transgender child in this school district. Up until now, we have never felt uncared for, targeted, harmed, or discriminated against. Admin, staff, and students within our elementary schools have been supportive, attentive, and inclusive to our child. Over the last 5 years, staff and students have always used her correct name and pronouns. This has been life-changing and life-affirming for her. She has always used the girls' restroom with no issue at all. If she was prohibited from doing so, she would not be able to attend Westerville City Schools. It would not only be discriminatory, but traumatic, and would most certainly out her to other students and staff. Your recent email, filled with restrictions for staff and restrictions for genderqueer youth, has put a target on the back of my child, of my family. Your email promotes transphobia and ignorance towards transgender people. It is in alignment with all the other attacks coming at trans youth from the Ohio State Legislature and the Ohio Department of Education Board. In conversations post-email, you have stated firmly that your email was meant to be inclusive and supportive of trans youth and their families. Will you explain and state your position now on the record? Will you send another email to all families in the district expressing your apologies and commitment to protect, support, and uplift trans students in every way possible? Will you choose courage over fear? Our kids' lives depend on it. Your email has already caused harm and trauma to many families, so much so that I could never, ever read what you wrote to my child. And the guidelines proposed will continue to put the lives and experiences of trans kids at risk. Do better, be better, lead by example, right your wrongs, make Westerville City Schools a beacon of light and a place of refuge, support, and celebration for our LGBTQIA students. We are trusting you with our babies. Sincerely, the mother of an elementary-aged Westerville City Schools transgender student. Thank you.
Thank you, Valerie. Up next, we have Reagan Lopez, and I need a little help with the last name. Okay, thank you. Welcome.
Hello. Ooh, that's really loud. My name is Regan Lopez de Victoria. I've lived in Westerville for about 8 years. I have 3 children. 2 of them attend Westerville City Schools. I come here today with concern about the disconnect between the language in the email statement and Dr. Kellogg's statement of intent tonight. If this statement was meant to comfort and provide clarification, the opposite was achieved. When I look at language like strives to be inclusive without mentioning how, or maintains specific policies without naming those policies. And I do understand that a full policy layout is not appropriate for like a district-wide email, but those words read like lip service, purposefully opaque in order to avoid direct positive affirmation of the LGBT community. So LGBT folks exist, and most kids have loved ones somewhere along the LGBTQ spectrum, and they know what's up. Like, we aren't doing our kids any favors if we think that we can avert our collective adult gaze from the existence of LGBT people and just call it a day in education. If we want them to do their jobs well, teachers, staff, and students have to be able to handle their own pronouns, say gay, say trans, and know that the district has their back. This email was the opposite of that vibe. Vague language in policy around pronouns or gender fluidity will have a chilling effect on the vulnerable members of our student body. It will embolden the bullies and silence the bullied. When Westerville City Schools makes a policy that allows a parent to veto a child's name preference or bathroom preference, what I hear is that a parent's experience is valued over the student's, that more care is being given to the perception of legal vulnerability than the actual well-being of the children entrusted in your care. Is this school district operating for the benefit of children or to placate a few litigious adults? So I want to talk about bathrooms for a minute. This is from the email. In general, students should use the restroom that corresponds to the gender documented on the official school record. Staff should work with students who express a need to use a restroom that is not consistent with the gender documented on the record. So this one's super dangerous. Policies that allow interpretation on a case-by-case basis will lead to discrimination that cannot reliably be documented. Students will have to do the mental calculus of, does this staff member understand my situation? Are they going to be open to discussing this? Are they going to make this worse for me? We're asking children to advocate for themselves rather than creating school policy that advocates for them. An example of affirmative policy language would be, students should use the restroom of their preference, full stop, and then go to the mat for those kids. And another example of affirming policy would be to ensure that schools have a gender-neutral option, thereby avoiding the issue entirely. As a matter of fact, all 3 high school GSAs have submitted a statement of need and proposal regarding gender-neutral bathrooms way back in February to the district. And I would love to hear a public response from the district and the board to that effect. Lots of LGBT kids don't have supportive families. And with this email, the already narrow channel between school policy and survival just got a lot more shallow. I am worried about these kids. Language like we saw in the email attempts the appearance of a backbone without all that messy backbone stuff. And as a parent, I would like to hear how the school district will be protecting our LGBT kids from discrimination, not how they'll avoid it or a lawsuit, with specific policies that prioritize student safety and health over the district's legal liability. Thank you so much for your time.
Thank you very much. And our last speaker this evening is Charity Grooms. Welcome.
Hello, pronouns are she, her. Thank you everyone for sharing them. Just a few points in response to the statement from Dr. Kellogg. First is, if teachers are prohibited from asking students for their pronouns, I wonder why the guidance was missing instructions telling the teachers they can only use gender-neutral pronouns such as they, them. Second, I heard there are no restrictions on staff sharing their pronouns, but that was also missing from the email. As a Westerville graduate and a current parent of a Westerville student, I'm incredibly disappointed and frankly outraged by the recent guidance that the district communicated regarding the treatment, actually mistreatment, of students that are part of the LGBT+ community. Teachers now have many obstacles preventing them from creating a safe space for an extremely vulnerable student population. School is the only safe space for some of these students, but the district cares more about protecting itself from negligible legal risk than the fragile lives at stake. The temporary injunction the district cites for the horrendous guidance does not change current law, but puts a temporary hold on implementing guidance documents from the U.S. Department of Education. As a result, the Department of Education was required to publish the guidance documents for a 60-day comment period, which ended 2 days before the email went out. I'm going to read a quote from the law firm of Pepple and Wagner. It's an Ohio-based law firm that has locations in Cincinnati and Cleveland in response to the injunction. The injunction does not prevent Ohio school districts from treating students consistent with their gender identity, and any policies, procedures, or practices to that effect, which are currently in place, do not need to be changed. Boards of education are advised to review their policy manuals to determine whether any revisions concerning the scope and application of their Title IX policy will be necessary in the event that an injunction is lifted. So Pepple and Wagner is not only saying that the schools have no legal need to change current policies and procedures or practices due to the injunction, but they're actually saying you need to get prepared for when the injunction is lifted and make sure that your policies and procedures that are in place are adequately protecting students according to the draft of the Department of Education guidelines. I understand that the district has legal counsel providing contrary guidance. I understand the district is the client and the community, and students are not. I plead with the district to seek new legal counsel that has more expertise in these issues. I plead with the district to reach out to an organization such as Trans Ohio or Equality Ohio for a second opinion. I plead with the district to better understand this community by engaging your LGBT plus families. This will be critical and life-saving as these students are being used as political pawns. We all need to band together and protect our students. Do better, Westerville, and retain new legal counsel. Thank you.
Thank you, Charity. Moving on to board comments this evening, and who would like to go first?
Yeah, sure. Thank you for speaking. Really, everything you say, I'm taking to heart. There are things I would like to say, but will refrain because of loved ones in my own family that I shouldn't speak about in this setting. But please know that I hear you, okay? So thank you for coming to speak tonight.
I would like to thank you all for coming to speak tonight, too. And if I might have said sexual identity or sexual orientation, I know the distinct difference. And I want to say thank you, Lori, for correcting me. And thank you for bringing your concerns forward. And I'm always open to listening and to understanding and talking. So please reach out. Thank you. I did have a quick legislative update. Thankfully, not much has moved on these horrendous bills that we were talking about a little bit earlier in the General Assembly. House Bill 616, 327, and 322 have not moved since last year. House Bill 616 has not moved since this year, earlier this year, and so I'm really thankful for that. Another bill that has been brought to my attention is House Bill 123. It was introduced by Republican Mark Frazier from Newark and Republican John Cross from Kenton. And it's in the Senate Ways and Means Committee since June of 21. So I doubt it's going to get much traction. But if it does move, it would modify the community reinvestment areas and the terms which property tax can be exempted from taxation, which will reduce revenues for school districts amongst other entities. So that's all I have in terms of legislative updates. I want to thank Carrie. I know Carrie and Local 137 and AAS worked really hard to come to an agreement. It's been a long time. I'm just really thankful for all of your service. Thank you.
I would just like to take a few moments to extend a few thank yous. I would first like to thank the Westerville Education Foundation for the outstanding event that they hosted at Minerva France Elementary, Grow and Glow. Yes. It was an outstanding event with great attendance. Many area organizations were represented to be able to share information with members of our community. And we were also fortunate and blessed to be able to have some members of Minerva France's family that were present to be a part of that celebration as well. So just want to thank the Education Foundation for their partnership and working with the district, working with us on that event. I would also like to take a moment to, again, thank our negotiation teams that arrived at an agreement. In this day and age, we are seeing where there are many different groups that are not able to use the negotiation process to arrive at a mutually agreeable place. So thank you for the hard work that I know went into the agreement that we now have in place. And with that, that's it.
I also wanted to offer a couple of thanks as well. The Education Foundation, the Grow and Glow, I've heard wonderful things. I didn't take my crutch to the event, but everyone said it was absolutely delightful. And if you haven't been able to get to Minerva, France, I hope you will go. It is an uplifting experience just to walk in the door. It's a beautiful school, and I am so thankful that it's joined the other siblings that we have within the district, our schools. And Amherst had such an incredible, they call it the 50-ish commemoration, because the actual 50th birthday happened during COVID, and so they waited until we could all be there as a community. The turnout was wonderful. The people who came, who were, are currently students there, currently staff members there, parents there, people who used to work there, people who went to school there, people who live within the neighborhood. It was a true celebration of the Amherst community, as much as it was that school. And it's interesting to think about the life of Amherst Elementary over the years. When Amherst opened, people came from all over the world to see this amazing open concept school. And we have spent the last how many years finding ways to put that behind us. And listening to people as they walked through Amherst and they saw the changes in Amherst and what it looks like now, and the light that flows into Amherst and the color that is now endemic in Amherst. And people, I didn't hear a single negative comment about the beauty of Amherst and the wonderful educational environment it is now, and the 50 years of wonder that Amherst has been. So it was such a joy to be there, and to be there with them, and to hear all the memories, and to hear all the great things that are going to be happening at Amherst. So congratulations to everyone who did that. And the Westerville Education Challenge, those of you who are involved in that, I know will probably want to say more about it. What a wonderful opportunity to celebrate and work toward betterment of all that we do around our children's mental health. So I'll let you take care of that, because that's something I know that's very dear to your heart, that you're deeply engaged in. So I guess my thank you is kind of an overall thank you. Yeah, there are things, always things, that cause division, that need discussion, that require our deep attention. Always. There are also always things that should draw us back together, and things that should cause us to say, thank you just for being part of it all. And the things that have been going on in the district, the events that have gone on, the events of happiness, the events of concern, it all comes around to a big thank you, because that is who this community is. So we'll keep working at what we need to work at, and we'll keep celebrating the things that are worth celebrating. So thank you to this community.
Thank you, Nancy. That was very nice. I echo all of my colleagues' comments. I just want to make one comment, so that this is the comment to me that is of most importance. The speakers tonight were very thought-provoking, and I want to say thank you to all of the speakers. I want to make it really clear that I stand with the LGBTQ plus community. So I'm saying it out loud. It's on the record. I want all children to feel loved and valued and heard and safe. So I just wanted to leave it with that tonight. And with that, we're going to move on to 16.1. Dates, times, and locations of the next meeting. The board will meet in regular session on Monday, October 10th, 2022 at 6 p.m. right here at the Early Learning Center. And with that, may I have a motion to adjourn?
So moved.
Second.
Mr. Bell?
Yes.
Dr. Nestor Baker?
Yes.
Mrs. Meyer?
Yes.
Mrs. Altman?
Yes.
Mrs. Davidson?
Yes. And with that, we're adjourned. Thank you so much.